Hello, I'm Ileana Piña. I have recently taken a position at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia, and this is my blog. I wanted to spend a little time today talking about the heart failure guidelines. We have been waiting for this American College of Cardiology / American Heart Association and now Heart Failure Society of America guidelines. All three organizations have collaborated here. It also takes into consideration the definitions of heart failure, which were published in the Journal of Cardiac Failure, which is the Journal of the Heart Failure Society of America, and that was published over a year ago. And I think it was setting the stage for this set of guidelines. Certainly the Europeans published their guidelines in the summer of 2021 at about the same time as the European Society of Cardiology meetings. And we've all been wondering, is it going to be the same or are there any differences? Those guidelines already included the SGLT2 inhibitors, and we had a consensus statement from the American College of Cardiology showing the benefits of the SGLT2s and including them sort of in the basis of care. Well, this is essentially one of the things that is now in these new guidelines, or the so-called pillars of care, which are made up of 4 individual drugs. Certainly the SGLT2 inhibitors, not defined as one item versus another one. It's not empagliflozin specific, it's not dapagliflozin. It's looked at as a drug class. The beta blockers, which are not going to disappear, the same beta blockers that I have talked to you about on this blog. The mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists, which would be the 3rd drug. And then the 4th drug, the RASI. And what is different is that they have moved the ARNI further up, even though if you look closely, it's a 1A indication, so is the ACE inhibitor, and so is the ARB as a 1A indication. But they're calling the ARNI the preferred, and they're saying very specifically it's for class 2 to 3. Well, because that is where the paradigm trial sat, in class 2 to 3. And this past year, there was another small trial of the very advanced heart failure where the drug did not meet its specified endpoint. And then they're moving 3 and 4 to the standard RASI inhibition. So that's a little bit different. And as clinicians, I want you to read it. There's an executive summary that is much easier to read. The other thing that I am very happy about is that they really emphasize team care. And I think that's a stronger point than has been made before, that team care is necessary to take care of these sick patients that are very complicated. They have also then looked at Hefpef. Very interestingly, I expected this, that they would emphasize the same things that they've had in the previous guideline about Hefpef. For example, treat blood pressure. Make sure the blood pressure is reduced. If the patient has any signs of ischemia, deal with that, look for it, work it up. How about arrhythmias? Work up and see if there are in fact arrhythmias. So all these peripheral things to Hefpef that are really important. And then they talk about, for example, in the Paragon trial where Hefpef was defined, but the drug beyond 57 seemed to have actually an opposite hazard ratio. And then they mentioned the SGLT2 inhibitors. And right now, the only one that we really have solid data on is empagliflozin in the empagliflozin preserved trial, which had a very dramatic reduction in the primary endpoint, but not mortality in the primary endpoint, mostly heart failure hospitalization and repeated heart failure hospitalization. So it wins on both fronts and some improvement in health status as well. There is a sub-study or a small group study of sotagliflozin. That may be what they included because they've made it a class recommendation of a 2A for the SGLT2 inhibitors in Hefpef. But again, it's giving us something that we didn't have before. And very similar to the previous guidelines, they have kept the 2B for spironolactone. There is an explanation in there about in the TopCat trial where the benefits were seen at the lower range of ejection fraction, not at the higher range. So everything kind of leads us to keep thinking about this group that appears to be different. And they're spending a lot of time in these guidelines about MREF, which is the Europeans initially described it as sort of middle ref. But to me, clinically, these patients behave like Hefpef, and it means somewhere between 40 and 49 or 41 and 49. It's kind of sitting in that middle range, and they do make some distinctions about what to do. So I really recommend that you read in the executive summary what they're saying about those. And then I want to finish off with a different idea in the guidelines. They now are talking about value. And I think that was put in there because in the United States, Medicare is moving to payment for value and payment for quality and payment for better outcomes. And so they are describing that, for example, a drug may be expensive, but the value to reduction in hospitalization, say, or reductions in death is very high up there on the scale. So that's a brand new section. And then finally, they still talk about iron deficiency and why it's so important to work up iron deficiency. They mention sleep apnea, they mention hypertension, all the things that were in the previous 2013 guidelines and then the 2017 guidelines. So we have been waiting for this. The executive summary is very well put together. The tables are easy to read, and you can put this in your office and take a look at it. But I think in general, you need to get the patients who have Hefpef on the 4 drugs. And those are the pillars of care that we really need to follow. Everything else may be, a little bit here and a little bit there. And think about the SGLT2s in Hefpef as well, besides doing all the other ancillary things that we need to do. This is Ileana Piña. Thank you for joining me today, and I hope to talk more about this in the future. Have a great day.